What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the ShockerRacing Garage. Today we're going to be working on Project Shaka Khan. I think that's the name we've been going with for it, and let us know in the comments if you think that's good or not. I don't know. It's still verdict is out. But today is lift day, and you have seen us install these Clayton Offroad lifts before on our Jeeps, and obviously you know we're big fans. Today what we want to do though is we're going to get a little more detailed in the install process on this two-door. For those of you who don't know, this is a 2008 Rubicon. So today we're going to be installing the Clayton Offroad 3.5-inch Overland Lift Kit, which includes all 8 of your control arms, front and rear track bars, sway bar end links, bump stops, and we did add some shocks, and we'll get into the details of that a little bit later. And obviously it comes with the springs. I haven't opened those up yet. Those are over here. But we want to do a little more detailed install just to show you guys how we install these lift kits on the ground in the ShockerRacing Garage here with just some basic tools. We don't have a lot of fancy tools. We're not using a lift. For the most part, we choose to do it on the ground just because that's what we're comfortable with, and it's been fairly easy. So right now, as you can see, Greg has been going around the Jeep and adding some blue painter's tape in a handful of spots, because the first thing we want to do is measure. We want to get some pre-measurements so that we can find out just how big the 3.5-inch lift kit actually is. Because as Greg found out on his blue two-door JK, the 3.5-inch lift kit gained him quite a bit more than 3.5 inches, being that it's a two-door and it's lighter. So we're gonna find out exactly on this Jeep how big it gets. We'll find out, but stay tuned to the end for that. So yeah, we've learned some tips and some tricks, and we're gonna try to share that information with you as we go. So first thing we gotta do here is we always start with the front end. We're gonna get it jacked up in the air, get the front tires off, and get going. Okay, so now that we've got it up on jack stands, make sure safety first, get some good heavy duty jack stands, and you're definitely gonna want a good high reach jack to get it high enough off the ground. Because what you wanna do is you wanna be able to manipulate the front end when we get to the rear axle. You need to have room to move it up and down to be able to remove everything, get the springs out, get the new bigger springs in. So it definitely helps to have it high up off the ground. We've got these good 3.5-ton jack stands that we always use from American lifting products. And then we're gonna use our high lift jack to manipulate the axle up and down. I'm gonna show you, we already spent the other night kind of setting all the control arms to length, the track bars. We cut the sway bar end length, so I'll show you all that. We did that ahead of time on another night so that we're not spending a lot of time today with the tedious nonsense. Okay, so we are taking tonight to just prep everything and get all the control arms and all the track bars and everything kind of set and locked to the lengths that they need to be, so that when we're ready to actually do the install on the Shaka Khan Jeep, we are ready to go and don't have to worry about setting any of these things. Because I've been doing so many of these lift kits, we actually printed out all the instructions, and I made a nice little binder here, because Clayton does give you nice detailed instructions step by step. And this is like, I don't know, I think it's like our 7th one. But what you'll notice here in my little book is that it gives you the different lengths depending on which lift kit you have and whether it's JK, JL. It'll tell you what size you need, and then all the steps on how to do the lift kit. So I printed this out, put it in my binder so it's nice and easily available. So we're gonna jump into setting these lengths and getting them dialed in so that they're ready to go when we install in the Jeep. So make sure you check your measurements from Clayton directly and dial these in exactly. And you wanna make sure that it's center of the hole to the center of the hole. All right, and once you get that set, you can kind of just lightly lock down this jam nut so it doesn't spin on you or mess up. And so what we have found when we have adjusted these control arms, if you go by the specs that Clayton gives you right on their website for the install, every single time we have done one of these lift kit installs, we have been right on spec for the alignment. So we always recommend that you do have the alignment checked by a professional. Highly recommend making sure you're detailed in setting these control arm lengths, because it's gonna pay off in the end. So the first time we did one of these Clayton lifts, these sway bar end links were like the death of us. Mainly because I didn't have the proper tools and we didn't really know what we were doing, because you do need to cut these threaded rods. And as you just saw, we used a Sawzall, and these Diablo blades have been like, they just cut through it like butter. So make sure you've got some good blades. If you're gonna go the Sawzall route, it definitely helps to have some good Diablo blades. I'll try to link to those in the description below. And then we also picked up one of these tools, and I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but what it does is if you're having trouble threading the head onto the sway bar end link, this will kind of just round out the tip of it and help you thread them on. Now today, of course, we're having good luck. They're just threading on right away, no problems. But yeah, that would just, you kind of use it with your drill on the end, and it rounds it off to make it easier to thread on. Big tip, pro tip, thread these jam nuts on before you cut it off, because we've had a lot of problems getting those jam nuts onto the threaded rod after we've cut them. So do yourself a favor, pre-thread those, as you just saw in the video, pre-thread those on. It'll save yourself a lot of headaches. So all those parts are pretty much ready to bolt in. And right now we're just gonna start breaking everything loose. You gotta start with the track bar and getting everything kind of broken down and released. Hopefully this stuff's not too crusty from being a 2008. And then we can get to the fun part. So Greg's just gonna break this loose here on the track bar. It is a 21 just to break it loose. Okay, so we're removing the upper shock bolt, and we found that just clamping a vice grip on there while you're undoing it, it'll hold the shock in place from spinning. Now, obviously, if you aren't changing your shocks, maybe you didn't go with a super tall lift, or if you're going with shock extensions, then you don't actually have to remove the upper. You can kind of leave it hanging and just put the shock extension in at the bottom when you're ready. But we're going with new shocks, so this had to come out. We've got the shocks out, we've got everything broken loose. We ended up actually cutting off the front sway bar links because we're not gonna use them, and they were kind of stripped out or corroded. Then what we did was we disconnected the breather line from the differential, and because it is a Rubicon, it does have the lockers, so it's got a couple of plugs in it. We disconnected those. And then we just lowered the axle down. Now that everything was disconnected, we were able to lower the axle down and pop the springs out, which was super easy. And now we are at the point where it's time to start doing the control arms. Now, Clayton does recommend that you do each side. It doesn't matter which side you start with, but you're gonna do the upper and the lower on each side at one time. All right, so we already swapped out the control arms on the driver's side. We're currently working on the passenger side. Everything seems to be pretty much 18 or 21 millimeter. So the upper control arms are 18 millimeter, and you can see Greg's fingers in there a little bit, and there's basically a flag nut in there, and what that's doing is it's holding the nut for you when you tighten it down, and he's just unscrewing it from, unbolting it from, yeah, a ratcheting 18 wrench is key, but
because the exhaust.
And yeah, the exhaust is tight up in there. And, on the passenger side, the bolt that goes through the upper control arm from the factory goes through from by the exhaust through the frame, and it's really tight here to the exhaust to get it out. So we did a lot of manipulation with this 2x4. Can you show that, Greg? This 2x4 and pulling against it, and eventually we were able to work that bolt out. Now, what we ended up doing for putting it back in is we came through, let me grab the camera here, Greg. We came through the frame hole here, straight through the control arm, and then now we've got the nut on the inside here, and we'll be able to tighten this down, and that's a lot easier to work with. So when you're trying to remove this bolt to take it out and the exhaust being in the way, we're using the 2x4 to wedge against the exhaust, but you want to go up and over with the bolt because that's the closer way to go, and that helps it pivot and angle around there. And so one major tip is always bolt in the frame side of the control arm first, and then that way you have access to the axle. And you can manipulate it up and down both with your jack stand and, you know, by grabbing it by hand. And you can do all these things. Sometimes it helps to have a second jack, but basically we're able to manipulate it up and down until we get the control arms lined up and into place. So you can see right now this one here isn't quite lined up, but we can kind of manipulate it and use some screwdrivers and just trying to get things lined up so we can get the bolts started. There we go.
And I should, if you lift it up like that, just tap it through.
So everything with these control arms is just about manipulating the axle up and down, forward and back, you know, and that'll eventually line things up. A few things have changed. It's been a few days. We decided to make some last minute decisions, and we added a set of TerraFlex speed bumps. I didn't show that video because there are plenty of videos on how to install those, and it is a little bit tedious to do. So you can check those out on other channels, but we got these in there. These are the 4-inch bump stops. We also picked up a can of Worth Rust Armor paint, and what we did was we just brushed it on the frame to kind of freshen it up. And what that stuff does is it actually dries out the rust and dehydrates it so that it can't continue to grow and build on the frame. So if you notice, it is a lot shinier black. It looks good, looks fresh. So it comes in this 1 quart can, and we just poured some into a solo cup and brushed it on, and it really didn't take much. Maybe about an hour of time, and then you got to give it some time to dry up.
About that much.
Yeah, we didn't use much at all. We did the brake line extensions here to move the brake lines a little longer. And one last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pop the ABS sensors out of the brackets here and just extend them a little bit so that we've got a little bit more extension on the ABS sensors here. So we'll pop those out, and then what we do is we'll just kind of zip tie them in here so that it's got a little more length so that it's not pulling on this when we are flexing. So we went with the Bilstein shocks. This is what Clayton recommends with their lift kit. So we went with these. It's our first time running a Bilstein shock. All right, so I'm just gonna feed the shock up through here. And then we've got the little rubber and the metal capper here goes up top. And then they provide, these Bilstein shocks came with a new nut. So these JK front shocks, you don't have much room to work up in there. It's real tight, but you can just barely get it started, and then it's a 17mm wrench. So you just grab the 17mm. We use a little ratcheting wrench here, and these only get torqued to 20 pounds, 20 foot-pounds, so it doesn't take much, but we are able to just kind of thread it on here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull this boot down so that we can see if this starts to spin on us. What we did was we actually turned the wheels to the driver's side just to give us a little more clearance here. And then we actually jacked up on the other side, which brought this side of the axle down, which helped us get that spring up in there and just kind of spun it on. And then that should drop right into place. You can see you got to make sure you get it into this pocket down here at the bottom, and it'll sit right there, right there. So we're gonna feed the puck through and drop it down in. Well, the spring is completely loose, so you can see that's dropped in there. And then Greg's gonna just make sure that the spring seats properly as I lower the jack on the other side. Okay, so working on the driver's side, Greg's just actually kind of just threading it up, and as he's spinning it, it's pulling itself up the spring until it popped on. And it's in, and then we got to just feed the puck through for the bump stop. And then I'll let the jack down on the other side so that it pulls it tight, and we can make sure this one gets seated, and then we can bolt in the pucks and to finish tightening the shocks and everything else down. So we got the bump stop pad is in here. We got that bolted down. You just put the nut through the bottom here and the Allen screw. Okay, so we kind of got the springs, the shocks all buttoned up. Now we're gonna remove the track bar, and then we're gonna leave the sway bar end links for a little while later because we do need to remove the end links from the back side. Those are gonna get moved up front, and then there's fresh new ones for the rear. So Greg's gonna go ahead and unbolt this track bar here. When we pulled the bolt out of there, the axle did shift a bit, so be careful there. About 1.5 inches, and then we got that side out, and we can pull this bolt out. Go ahead and pull the track bar out of there, Greg. And that's out. Now we can grab the new one from Clayton that we've already set to the proper specs.
Back 1 inch off, because this is where the hole is right here.
So we need to get the axle to shift over.
I'll let you know if it's getting closer. Started.
Yep. All right, so at this point, everything is bolted in. It is not torqued. Nothing's been tightened down or anything like that. We do have to still do the sway bar links, but we can do those later. And basically when we get all done and we get everything back on the wheels, we can come back through. We're gonna torque everything, double check everything over. But for now, everything is loosely bolted in, and we can get it back on the wheels, and we're gonna get the back end jacked up so that we can work on painting back there and start the process of the rear. All right, so we got the back end jacked up in the air, and I just wanted to show you the difference on the frame here. So this is the area that we've already coated. You can see I can touch up a little bit more in there. But you can see the area that we've already coated on the frame is nice and gloss and shiny black. And then this is the crustiness of how it looked when we started. So we're gonna paint all this just to get all this kind of slight surface rust, the crustiness freshened up, make it look a lot better. So we're gonna glove up. Greg's got his doctor gloves on and start to make a mess. All right, so we are moving on to the rear suspension for this Clayton lift install on the JK here. And the first step, just like the front, is to go around and loosen up all the nuts and bolts for the track bar, the upper and lower control arms, disconnect the brake lines, things like that. So that's what we're working on right now. We got Greg and Scott are going to town under here. And they're just getting everything loose. We can loosen the shock bolts. All right, so we got all the bolts loose on everything, all the control arms and everything. We just popped the brake line here out of the frame, so it's just one 10mm bolt. Pop that loose. Now we're gonna go to the e-brake lines, and I'm gonna show you some pointers on that because that's been a little bit of a challenge for us over the years as we've been learning how to do these. We're basically trying to get the e-brake cable loose so that we're not pulling on this when we lower the axle to get the springs and stuff out. So you're gonna have to get this out of the bracket here and get this out of the bracket here. And in order to do all that and get this loose, basically what we've been doing is we've been pulling this out and kind of clamping it down to make everything easier. So Greg's gonna go ahead and show us how he's been doing that. So you try to pry it out, and then we've been clamping on these vice grips to hold it in place. So we sprayed a little PB blaster on there because we noticed the other side of this hook is a little crusty, so we're hoping that'll help us get it out, but this one is actually fighting us. There it goes. Yeah, it was just kind of caught. I think this is a little crusty on the end, and then you want to just pop it out of this bracket here, and you can see there's just a bunch of different little tabs that you want to push in, and then you can slide it down and out of the bracket. Now it's fully loose, and we've got all the room to drop the axle to get the springs out. Okay, since this is a Rubicon, I do have to disconnect the locker connector, and always got to do the diff breather. So that just slides right off. Just pops off the nipple there, and I'll have to slide under here more because it is on the front side of the axle, this cable here. There we go. So these end links actually have an Allen head on the one side, but they're all crusty because this Jeep has 175,000 miles on it. So we couldn't really get an Allen in there and get a good bite on it to be able to actually unbolt it. So we just clamped on here with some vice grips and zipped the nut off just because these are crusty. These are supposed to get moved to the front end of the Jeep per this lift kit. Being that this is a 175,000 mile Jeep, we don't want to reuse these end links. So I'm going to either get another set or something for the front end, but for now we just don't care if we damage these taking them off. And now we just got to zip off the bottom side. For these rear end links, you can use a 19 millimeter wrench on the inside, and then it's an 18 on the nut side, and just zip those guys off. And then on the lowers, it's just the 18, and you can zip it off. So
you want to take the shock off prior to this because it's in the way.
Yeah, we did notice that on the passenger side that we had to pop this one out so that we could get to that nut for down there. We'll show you that in just a second. And then we'll zip that lower shock bolt out real quick, which those are 18s as well. And we do have just a pointer. We do have the axle supported with the jack stand just so that it doesn't just drop or anything at any point. Okay, and then with that shock out of the way, you've got room to access the 18 there. That was an 18 on both sides, right, boys? Yep. And then the end link can pop right off. And then we're going to go ahead and just remove the upper shock mount, which was a 16 millimeter, and there's two of those up top there, right, Scott?
Yep, two.
So there's just two 16 millimeter bolts up there. And we'll just drop those out, and then the shock can come right off. All right, so we just started lowering the axle down, and now we are just popping the spring out. Make sure you hang on to the rubber isolator at the top, because that's gonna have to go back in. But yeah, now the axle is lowered, and we can start working on the control arm. So Clayton recommends that you do both the upper and lower on one side, and then move over to the other side and do those. So we will probably start on the driver's side. It doesn't matter which one you do, actually. So apparently after I changed the battery in my GoPro, it stopped recording any audio. So I'm going to have to narrate this. But next step is just going to be to remove the upper and lower control arms. There's nothing too tricky here in the rear of the suspension. Just remove them one by one. Make sure you save all of the bolts and nuts from your control arms, as you will need to reuse them. And pay attention to where they came from, as some of them have the flag nuts on the backside. I just wanted to compare the difference between the Clayton control arms and the factory non-adjustable control arms. Obviously, the Clayton ones have the adjustability, but also are much beefier, much heavier duty, and feature their maintenance-free gyro joints. There is an obvious difference in the quality of the build of these control arms from Clayton versus the stock. When installing the control arms, make sure you pay attention to the shape and the angle of the control arms, as well as Clayton's recommendation as to which end of the control arm has the adjustable end on it. When we begin installing these control arms, we always start by bolting in the frame side first and then working on installing it to the axle side, because the axle has more adjustability up and down and forward and back as you're installing it. So definitely recommend installing it at the frame side first and then working on the axle side. Removing the rear track bar is pretty straightforward. You're just going to remove the bolt and nut from the frame side, and then you'll move over to the driver's side of the vehicle, where you will undo the bolt with the flag nut to remove the track bar. Next, you need to install the rear track bar relocation bracket. Make sure to install the spacer sleeve between the factory bracket and the new Clayton bracket. Reuse the factory bolt and flag nut to hold the bracket in place. Next, you will install the lower part of the bracket around the axle tube using the supplied hardware. Now you can go ahead and install the Clayton Offroad rear track bar into the bracket. Slide the frame side of the track bar into the factory mount and replace the factory bolts. Now we can go ahead and install the Clayton rear springs. Make sure you include the factory rubber isolator on the top of the spring. Now we're installing the TerraFlex speed bump stops. If you're using the bump stops included with the lift kit from Clayton, you can go ahead and bolt those in at this time. You can now install the rear shock using the factory hardware. Do not over tighten the bolts at this time, as the torque specs for the rear shocks is very low. And finally, we can install the Clayton rear sway bar end links. Pay attention to how you bolt these in, as they will go from the outside towards the inside of the vehicle. Don't forget to install the supplied brake line extensions that come in your Clayton kit. These just bolt into the frame and will allow you to flex a couple extra inches without pulling the brake lines. All right, so we got it back down on the ground now for the first time with the full lift done. Back down on the stock wheels and Rubicon tires, which are 255, 75, 17s. So these are 31s. I guess that must be what the JKs came with factory on the Rubicon. Greg's taking the measurements here, going around to see how much lift we got. And right here at the front driver's side, we gained about 5 1/8 inches. We're getting just about 5 inches of lift all the way around with this 3.5 inch Clayton lift. So just make note that if you're gonna do a Clayton lift on a 2-door JK, it is gonna gain more than the advertised height. So just plan for that. If you don't plan on going with big tires, you don't need to quite go as big with your lift kit. All the way around, we gained right at about 5 inches of lift with this thing. And that's just the beginning. So we do have the wheels and tires already coming here. Well, they're actually here. I got them mounted and balanced, but we're not gonna show you guys that just yet. You'll have to wait for the next video. But for now, Greg and I are gonna crawl around all underneath there and start torquing everything. You want to wait until it's on the ground to torque all the control arms, track bars, shocks, everything once it's settled flat on the ground. So we're going to do that. And one little tip that we have learned, let me grab this here. Greg and I started doing this after like our 3rd lift. I've seen other people do it, and it's obviously very smart and simple, but we take a chalk marker or paint pen, and everything that we torque, every bolt that we do, when we're done, we mark it on the bolt and to the frame or the axle, whatever it is, so that we know that we have torqued it, 1, so we know it's done. And number 2, we can easily crawl around under there before we go off-roading and double check and make sure that nothing has come loose, you know, so that we can make sure, you know, if anything starts clunking, we can roll around and easily see if any of the bolts have moved. So Clayton's instructions on their website do a good job of telling you all the torque specs for the upper and lower control arms, the track bars, all that stuff. So we just set the torque wrench to the proper settings, torque them down, and then mark them with our paint pen. Now, the one key thing, and this is a big pointer for you guys, the jam nuts are huge. So we struggled in the beginning. We were like using a pipe wrench to tighten them down. There's no way to torque them, anything like that. So we picked up this set of jam nut wrenches from Motobilt, and let me show you what they look like. So this is actually 2 separate sets here, but they come in a bunch of different sizes. You know, each set has different sizes included. I picked up both just to make sure that I would always have the size needed. Greg's over here hurting himself trying to torque this to 120 on this one. It's hard when you're laying on the ground, got no leverage, but we got these so that it'll make it a lot easier to tighten down these jam nuts here. And you can see Greg's just putting a little line on the bolt and the bracket there so that we know if that turns. All right, so we are pretty much done with the lift kit install. Last thing we need to do is go for a test drive, double check that the steering is straight, and kind of double check everything. We'll get it outside eventually and flex it out. But for now, Clayton does require a CV style front drive shaft with their 3.5 inch lift kit for the JK. So we did pick up this Tom Woods drive shaft, and we're gonna go ahead and throw this in, but I'm not gonna bother showing the install on this because there's plenty of other videos on how to do the drive shaft install. So we're gonna throw this in, then we're gonna get this thing out of here and actually get it out for a ride. Now, I've been driving this thing for the last couple of weeks since we got the lift kit installed, and I'm actually currently driving on the new wheels and tires setup. But again, you're gonna have to wait till the next video to check that one out and find out what we went with for that. I wanted to do a little bit of a follow-up to finish out this video just to kind of give you my overall thoughts and feel about this setup. And I gotta say, I'm really enjoying driving this 2-door JK which I'm kind of surprised because I am used to the newer Jeeps, the JL and the JT, and of course the 392. This thing, I'm just really enjoying the drive. The ride quality with this lift kit is really good. It's got a really tight, sporty feel, and again, I did not upgrade any of the steering components whatsoever. They are factory JK steering components. I have no idea how many miles are on them, but the overall feel is definitely tight and stiff. I will say, I think the Bilstein shocks are a little stiffer than if you go with the Fox 2.0s. Greg's blue two-door, he's got the Fox 2.0s and doesn't seem to ride quite as stiff. Now granted, he's also put some miles on his whole setup, so it may have broken in or loosened up a little bit, but overall, really great feel. I'm really enjoying driving this thing, and I don't know, steering's tight, suspension feels good, and just overall, I can't say enough good stuff about this setup. If you guys have any questions or, you know, comments, anything you want to ask, feel free to drop them in the comments below or message us over on Instagram. I'm always happy to answer questions, and you know, if there's anything that was unclear in this video as far as the pointers go, definitely let me know. But otherwise, stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, because next week I'm going to be unveiling the wheel and tire setup that we went on this. And I think you guys are going to like these wheels. It's something completely new for myself. I've never seen these wheels in person and never had them installed on a vehicle. So check it out. We will see you next week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.